let's have an overview of Little Red Wolf by Paul William Schumacher. Now, when I lost my ability to run Dungeons and Dragons games and enjoy them, I decided I would much rather write novels. I decided eventually the main problem I was having with my story is I was too close to the character. So I decided to create a story based on somebody very, very far away from me. So my main character, first, is female. Second, she is an outdoorsman. And she happens to be brutish. She can't read. She gets trapped in a fairy tale kind of world. Well, not trapped. She's born into a fairy tale world. And she does not have the ability to be calm, rational, or, an adult. Because she's 17 years old, and 17-year-olds tend to be fiery and blustery and ready to kick you in the teeth, which is exactly who she is. Now, the book itself is based on fairy tales. The world of Lavoria is run by the fairies. Once upon a time, the fairies were on Earth. And then, during the King Arthur age, the Roman Empire went out and smashed all the fae in Europe to pieces. Now, upon doing this, the various fairy tale creatures suddenly lost their worshippers. Much like an American Gods kind of ideal, where the fae and the various godlike creatures gain power when people worship them. Now, there's a lot more to the story than that. You're going to discover that when you actually read the book, but that's the gist of it. Now, the way to get people to keep believing in them is through fairy tales. The fairies and their stories and the big bad book of Grimm are real. And you as a mortal can put on a fairy tale story like a cloak of power. It's called a mantle. You put on a mantle of power and you gain powers from that story. So, Selena puts on the mantle of Little Red Riding Hood, and she can now gain powers from that story. First of all, she is the hunter. Second of all, she's female. She encounters she has to go to Grandma's house. She encounters the big bad wolf. In this particular version, the big bad wolf becomes her traveling companion, and she gains various powers, like the ability to throw a grown man over her shoulder and climb up Rapunzel's hair. Now, part of that is just because she's kind of badass before the Mantle of Power, but once she gets the Mantle of Power, it gives her extra skills, extra abilities, extra nifty things. So Selena lives in this fairy tale world. And in this fairy tale world, there are monsters capturing damsels and various tropey things happening on the daily basis. In this particular situation, I was going through the internet and I encountered this story of a fairy queen who would put people into impossible situations, Saw style, in order to get them to make a binding contract with her. And she needed a bunch of immortal children for one reason or another. So she gets these royals into these horrible situations to make them promise her their firstborn. And once they've made that promise, that oath, she lets them go. And then there was this whole bit about, what do we do now? And I was reading the story, and it was somebody's short story. In fact, from what I gathered, it was before Reddit came out, so it was just like a blog post idea. And I read through it, and I was like, this is super cool. Well, they never made it into a book, and they never did anything with it. It was just kind of a short story idea they wrote. And I went, that would be a great villain. So I decided that is the start of the Gray Lady. The Gray Lady is this fairy queen type character who, does terrible things. And basically she's bored, and she's a bored immortal who wants to come up with her own version of various monsters, and she wants to make minions. One of the ways is to make werewolves, but werewolves are the domain of the moon goddess, and therefore she can't make real werewolves. They all tend to be kind of savage and crazy when she's looking for a werewolf that can think. It's a thing. It's a problem. And in her ongoing, quest, she picks a fight with Selena, and that's where the story really gets going. The Gray Lady kidnaps Selena's father, and Selena has to rescue him. So I inverted the damsel in distress trope. The person I damseled is the father, who honestly taught her most of what she knows. So he's not a weak character, but he's getting older, and he gets kidnapped, which sucks. And then you get, her attempt to rescue him, and she goes through a bunch of stories. She gains the Little Red Riding Hood mantle. She encounters a Goldilocks. They team up and rescue a Rapunzel from her tower. And then later on, they encounter the Babas, who are the various witches from a bunch of different fairy tales. Baba Ginger, who's the Hansel and Gretel witch. Baba Hulda from Old Mother Huld. And then there's Baba Sophronia, who is a Medusa with her daughter Thalia, who comes from a D&D picture I saw that had a young Medusa. And I went, oh, that's a great idea. So I created a Mother Medusa and a, 10-year-old Medusa. I also have Puck from A Midsummer Night's Dream, Jack from every story that has a Jack in it, which is a lot of them. Good grief, what else do I have? I'm kind of going through it in my head as I'm thinking about it. But yeah, and then at one point I have the story of Bluebeard, which is the Fletcher's bird in some versions. But yeah, all of these stories, this is how I came up with the plot. The character goes from story scenario to story scenario and to story scenario, and I run it like a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Here is the setting. Here are the creatures. Here are the inhabitants. Here's what's in this place. And now she has to go on, and how is this character going to get through this scenario? That's how I tend to run a lot of my games, write a lot of my stories. I even talk about it like I'm running a D&D campaign. So that's part one. We'll talk about more later.